In a previous blog entry, I was arguing that we can imagine replacing what we now call spiritual development with a more appropriate and inclusive term, metaphysical development. That was based on the assumption that a spiritual quest is nothing more than a person's attempt to give their life a meaning. And that is done by answering some fundamentally metaphysical questions. What is reality? Why do we exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Since then, my views have evolved, and I have now come to the conclusion that metaphysics alone might be somewhat limiting, and that all branches of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, axiology, and logic, need to be addressed in the quest for what can be seen as a spiritual journey. Two of them, metaphysics and axiology, probably more than the others, though I will argue later that exposing young people to logic and its principles is vital for developing critical thinking and a healthy skepticism.
Metaphysics is all the deep stuff you are thinking about when you are watching a sunset, listening to Leonard Cohen, or getting high. The birth of the universe, the existence of free will, the nature of reality, the number 42. It includes questions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between mind and matter. Epistemology looks at how we know the little we know. It deals with the limits of human knowledge and the relation between belief and truth. In epistemology, there are 4 ways to gain knowledge: divine revelation, experience, logic and reason, and intuition. Axiology considers principles and values. It is divided into 2 main areas: ethics, which is the questioning of societal morals and personal values, and aesthetics, which is the examination of what is beautiful, enjoyable, or tasteful. Whenever you discuss human rights, culture, gender equality, slavery, cheating, climate punishment, or if rock is better than rap, you're entering the territory of axiology. As none of them are natural laws, but just some temporary and localized human shared narratives. Logic is the branch of philosophy that seeks to organize reasoning. There are many ways to classify logical reasoning, but the most important are: deductive reasoning, also known as top-down logic, is when you take some true general statements or premises and use them to draw a logically sound conclusion. Here's the classic example. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. If the premises are true, the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. The main danger for deductive reasoning is the overgeneralization. Swans are white. Julia is white. Therefore, Julia is a swan. Inductive reasoning, or bottom-up logic, is somehow the opposite. It involves drawing a general conclusion from a set of specific observations. Humans have used inductive reasoning for their entire history. Every day so far, the sun has risen in the east and set in the west. Conclusion: the sun will probably continue to rise in the east and set in the west. A conclusion reached without astronomical calculations or concern for the laws of physics. With inductive reasoning, the conclusion might be true and it has some support, but it may nonetheless be false. During the Black Death in the 14th century, Jewish communities appeared to be dying in fewer numbers than their Christian neighbors. Many saw this as evidence that the Jews were intentionally spreading the disease by poisoning wells, rivers, and springs. As a result, Jewish people across Europe were tortured and killed. Abductive reasoning is when you take a set of observations and proceed to the likeliest possible explanation for the set. Abductive reasoning yields the kind of daily decision-making that does its best with the information at hand, which often is incomplete. This is very similar to how doctors work on patients by taking symptoms to make a diagnosis.
I'm not going to go deep into each of them. There are literally millions of resources able to do it much better than me. So I will focus on why opportunities of philosophical reflection are important in non-formal education, and how they might not always overlap with traditional spiritual moments. Why Scouting is well equipped to offer these opportunities, and how almost anyone can create and manage these moments even if their name is not Plato or Hegel.
1. Philosophical reflection. The big questions, whether they are about truth or beauty, friendship or fairness, what's right or what's real, are a natural, even essential part of human development. We are the only species that we know of able to reflect on these, and this has contributed significantly to our success on the planet. They are essential parts of what makes us human. If we consider the 5 W's we promote to be associated with modern spiritual development in Scouting, philosophy could contribute to at least 4 of them, with the possible exception of worship. And it will bring a welcome addition, especially in today's realities, because it promotes logical, critical, and reflective thinking, and the development of a reasoning competence. Philosophy is thinking dedicated to the improvement of thinking. It is both open-ended and rigorous. Philosophy taps into children's natural curiosity and a sense of wonder. It engages them in the search for meaning and enriches and extends their understanding. It strengthens thinking and reasoning skills and builds self-esteem. It helps to develop the qualities that make for good judgment in everyday life. By exploring concepts like truth, reality, knowledge, evidence, freedom, justice, goodness, rights, mind, identity, love, friendship, rules, responsibility, action, logic, language, fairness, reason, existence, possibility, beauty, meaning, self, time, God, infinity, human nature, thought, and so on, philosophical reflection goes beyond traditional spiritual development topics and contributes to achieving a set of skills which is now more important than ever in human history. Two, peak moments. Transformative learning, the one that actually makes a difference in the way a person perceives and understands the world, is often achieved when the brain is properly prepared for it. In Scouting, we try to do this by applying the learning by doing principle, not only for technical skills such as setting a camp or navigating a terrain, but also in the emotional or social areas. By immersing young people in a disruptive experience, such as projects involving people living in difficult circumstances or in less privileged areas, we intend to develop empathy and tolerance, because walking in someone else's shoes is a fail-safe way to ensure one sees the world from more than one perspective. Preparing the brain to the power of spiritual development was understood since prehistory, and one only needs to look at the paintings in Lascaux, the atmosphere in the medieval cathedrals, the oriental meditation techniques, or the hypnotic rituals of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. We do not ask fundamental questions and probably won't achieve a deeper understanding and appreciation of our lives while washing dishes.
We rarely camp in Lascaux or experience ayahuasca. Nevertheless, we have plenty of opportunities to get young people in the right state of mind, to ask and ponder those big questions, probably more than any other off-school activity. And this is because some of our elements in the educational method, mainly the peer group, the shared values expressed by the promise and law, the symbolic framework, but most of all, life in nature, are ideal backdrops to explore concepts that underpin the human existence.
A quiet morning filled with the sounds of the countryside, a sunset by the sea, the last steps before reaching the summit, the Milky Way in a clear night, an evening of storytelling at a campfire.
Or, in my case, the quiet solitude of the underground world are moments and places where ineffable terms such as beauty suddenly become tangible and have a direct impact on the brain and consciousness.
These are moments when we realize how insignificant we are in the great scheme of things, and also how wonderfully unique and irreplaceable. I am 100% aware that the colors are just massless photons of various energies hitting atoms in my retina. There is no such thing as red outside my own interpretation of the effect of those interactions. Music is just a pattern of compressed air vibrating my eardrum. There is nothing beautiful about it outside my brain's interpretation of the nervous impulses resulting from those vibrations. However, when walking in a forest on a crisp autumn morning, or when listening to Pink Floyd, I cannot help but wonder how a 1.5 kilograms of basically fat can produce the string of emotions and feelings which makes our lives worth living. And those are the only moments when my strict materialistic and deterministic view of the world is shaken. Being it the effect of dopamine, or something more transcendent than this, it is real nevertheless. The Florence syndrome, akin to what I described earlier, is named after Stendhal's visit to the Basilica of Santa Croce, about which he wrote, "Absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty, I reached the point where one encounters celestial sensations. Everything spoke so vividly to my soul." Creating and properly managing these opportunities will allow young people to get in a state which we can then exploit by planting the right seeds of philosophical reflection. A long time ago, a fellow scout leader from Romania one of those natural-born educators whose stories were listened to with mouth agape by children for tens of years, told me that, in a camp, the most important thing to plan for is a great meal in the middle of the camp and the last dinner. The rest is irrelevant. It can be innumerable iterations of pasta, which is generally the case. Now, you need to know that in Romanian scouting, meals are among the most important elements in a camp, and they can really set the tone for the entire event. I thought about this as being the scouting equivalent of folk tales, though I knew it to be true from personal experience. Until a few years back, when I read the book in which some experiments on the flaws and fabrications of memory are described. One of them involved interviewing patients who had undergone a colonoscopy, a procedure universally described as being decidedly unpleasant. Patients in the study group had colonoscopies that lasted from 4 to 60 minutes. But the duration of the procedure did not predict how they felt about it afterwards. Instead, it was the strength of their discomfort at its most intense moment and the level of discomfort they felt towards the end of the procedure. These studies support the so-called peak end rule, the fact that our perceptions about an experience are determined by how it feels at its most intense and how it feels at the end. The actual duration is irrelevant. Our memories filter how we feel about the things we've done and experienced. And they are defined more by the moments that seem most characteristic, the peaks and the finish, than by how we actually felt most of the time during the experience. Certainly, peak experiences happen almost naturally in our scouting activities. What I put forward here is that we, as scout leaders, should carefully plan and actually use them as a foundation for introspection and philosophical reflection. 3. Thought experiments. Getting people in the right state of mind is obviously only one part of the job. Though many people will naturally use their state of elation to have a spiritual reflection, as educators, we might want to channel the experience and also use the value of the group of peers. For this, there are several ways to encourage reflection, other than bluntly asking, "What do you think reality really is?" while gazing across the savannah in the dusk. One way, which works well because it does not imply the dogma of a right or wrong answer, but merely encourages personal reflection, is thought experiments and or paradoxes. Though thought experiments can be experienced alone in the shower, scouting adds the advantage of a group of peers with a similar set of values. In this community of inquiry, scouts also learn to respect, listen to, and understand a diverse range of views, adding and expanding their own understanding of the matter. The other advantage is that the leader does not have to be an expert on the topic. In philosophy, as in scouting, we should learn how to think, not what to think. In the most famous example of the power of thought experiments, Einstein used them to formulate his revolutionary theories long before technology able to perform relevant experiments to confirm them was invented. But the power of what-if scenarios for spurring deeper investigation and reflections is available to everyone, as long as the right story is presented. There are many such examples, and I have used quite a few of them with relative success with young people starting at the age of 11. And here are some of them with relevant links available in the transcription of this video or on my website.
Theseus is well known in Greek mythology, and most recognized for killing the Minotaur and for his grand sea travels. He goes away for months, he defies heavy storms and defeats all sorts of sea monsters. Of course his turbulent sea voyages leave their mark, and Theseus often has to go back to the shipyard for repairs. The shipmaster replaces the damaged planks and sails, and the ship goes back to sea. But not for long. As the years go by, more sections of the ship have to be replaced. Pretty soon every piece is replaced right down to the very last plank. The ship now consists entirely of new materials. Is it still the same ship? Just imagine that the shipmaster has the bright idea of taking all the old parts from the ship and putting them back together again. Does that mean that the ship will exist twice? And which one is the real one? The new one or the old one that's been reconstructed? Are they both real or neither of them? People are just the same. Over time our bodies change like the ship of Theseus. It takes no more than 7 years for our cells to renew themselves completely. Our values, opinions and interests also change. We might look at things differently than before and we may also think differently, but the fact is we are still the same person we were before, despite all the changes. We are the original. Or, are we? In 1987, the philosopher Derek Parfit imagined a variant of the ship of Theseus paradox. Imagine a human, Dave, entering a teletransporter, a machine that puts him to sleep, records his molecular composition, breaking him down into atoms, and relaying it to Mars at the speed of light. On Mars, another machine recreates Dave, from local stores of carbon, hydrogen, and so on, each atom in exactly the same relative position. Would Dave on Mars still be the same Dave? Well, the obvious answer seems to be yes. He was on Earth and now he's on Mars. However, it is not that simple. We took Dave apart atom by atom. Doesn't that mean we killed him in the process and just cloned him on Mars? Or did we actually transport Dave? Now let's add a twist. Instead of destroying Dave's original body, it is preserved during the scanning process. So now we have 2 copies of Dave, the original one, and the replica. Both of them are identical down to the last atom, and should be behaviorally indistinguishable. But surely he can't be in 2 places at once. If he survived at all, isn't it obvious that he survived as Dave's original self, not the clone? But what's the difference between Dave's original self, and the clone anyway? Imagine a cave, where hundreds of human beings are tied up, unable to move their heads, since their birth, with no knowledge of the outside world. They just stare straight ahead all day long. But they do get a little entertainment, as there's a shadow puppet show projected on the wall in front of them, with a fire burning in the back for light. Since this show is all these poor people can see, they think it's the best, most awesome reality ever. They chat about it, gossip, call people names, you know, the usual. So that's how life goes down in the cave until, one day, one of the prisoners manages to break free and crawls outside for the very first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes and he finds the new environment disorienting. When told that the things around him are real, while the shadows were mere projections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appeared much clearer to him. But gradually, his eyes adjust until he can look at reflections in the water, at objects directly, and, finally, at the sun, whose light is the ultimate source of everything he has seen. Feeling sorry for all his fellow prisoners, the freed prisoner goes back down and explains to everyone that they're all trapped in this massive cave, and that everything they think is real is an illusion. Guess what? They think he's nuts. That the journey has made him stupid and blind, and they violently resist any attempts to free them. Plato introduces this passage as an analogy of what it's like to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. Most people are not just comfortable in their ignorance, but hostile to anyone who points it out. You're standing on a footbridge overlooking a railway track, when you see a runaway train hurtling toward you. The brakes have clearly failed. Ahead are 5 people tied to the track. If you do nothing, they will be run over and killed. Can these 5 be saved? There's a fat man sitting nearby, who is also watching the train. If you were to push him over the footbridge, he would tumble down and smash on the track below. He's so obese that his bulk would bring the train to a shuddering halt. Sadly, the process would kill the fat man. But it would save the other 5. Should you push the fat man? Would you change your mind if, instead of 5 people, there would be 5 babies? Or 5 members of your family?
Four, the case for logic. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that if the COVID pandemic has taught us anything, it is the value of mental health and the importance of critical thinking. The avalanche of fake news and logical fallacies has tested everyone's rationality as never before. Trump and other populist post-truth society collided with the health crisis to create an environment where only those with a healthy skepticism could find any bearings in relation to the truth. This is because it is no longer enough to have access to facts. Everyone has access to facts these days. If we cannot understand how evidence and arguments are used and, more importantly, misused. Therefore, it is my absolute belief that is also the role of Scouting to cultivate logic and reason within its membership, as these intellectual tools are not always highly promoted in the formal education. There are two general directions where I feel our learning opportunities should be offered in Scouting. Understand the meaning and value of premises, reasoning and conclusions, and learn to recognize logical fallacies. Just as for the other areas of philosophy, logic and reasoning can be approached in a playful manner, beyond interpreting mathematical patterns. A study on the impact of teaching philosophy for youth aged 16 to 19 in non-formal education, done in 2018 in Slovakia, has shown that after only 2 months of using philosophical reflection within a community of inquiry, the equivalent of our patrol, so to speak, the average critical thinking score of the participants increased by more than 25% compared with that of the control group, as measured by the Watson-Glaser critical thinking appraisal test. Easily, the most important element in achieving an increased level of critical thinking is the capacity of identifying and assessing the main elements of an argument: premises, reasoning, and conclusion. An argument can be unsound if any of its elements is untrue or flawed. Both true premises and a sound reasoning are needed for a conclusion to be valid. Often, endless debates happen because the two sides do not see that both their reasoning are sound, but the premises each of them starts from are different. Debates between religious people and atheists are almost always starting from different premises, which means that no universally accepted conclusion could ever be drawn. And this is the reason why I stopped watching those famous, at least in the early 2000s, debates between Dawkins and De Souza. They were, to a large extent, a dialogue among deaf. The challenge of considering different premises in a debate is often insurmountable. Once the opposite view does not accept as truth the fact that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, that the laws of physics cannot be broken, or that stars thousands of light years from each other cannot influence human destiny, there is little to be done in terms of argument. However, for the argument themselves, as they are not judged as either true or false, but as sound or flawed, here we can objectively evaluate their value, especially if the premises are identical or at least similar. Flawed arguments are a feature of fake news, and are often identified as logical fallacies. There are a lot of them around, and it is vitally important to be aware and able to recognize them for any critical thinking to happen. When it comes to providing opportunities for learning logic in Scouting, I would suggest we mainly focus on evaluating the soundness of an argument and identify logical fallacies. There are numerous articles, books, and other resources dedicated to identifying logical fallacies, and we, as Scout leaders, should create activities and opportunities for our Scouts to be able to practice critical thinking through identifying them. The simplest activity involves giving participants definitions of the most common logical fallacies to study beforehand, and then play a game of identifying them in a clearly polarized debate, in a video or written form. You may create 2 teams and allocate points for every fallacy identified. You can also consider using highly partisan websites, starting with the batshit crazy ones, such as Active News, but then gradually looking into content proposed by more mainstream ones, such as PETA, Greenpeace, or Fox News. Of particular importance for me is applying this to social media content or advertising campaigns, especially those targeting young people. Here is a nice example of fallacies in ads.
When your cable company keeps you on hold, you get angry. When you get angry, you go blow off steam. When you go blow off steam, accidents happen. When accidents happen, you get an eye patch. When you get an eye patch, people think you're tough. When people think you're tough, people want to see how tough. And when people want to see how tough, you wake up in a roadside ditch. Don't wake up in a roadside ditch. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
There are also websites with interactive games in relation to logical fallacies, and you can see here some links. And there is also at least one good game to be played on mobile phones, called Cranky Uncle. A link for the game and potential related activities is provided here. A number of interesting online tests may be proposed to our scouts and have the results discussed in the patrol, and here is one example. To recap this long presentation, I was initially aiming for a 5 minutes video, but then the text sort of took a life of its own. Philosophical reflection can complement, extend, or even replace the topic of spiritual development in Scouting by exploring metaphysics, axiology, epistemology, and logic through thought experiments and questioning. The patrol may act as a community of inquiry. The peak moments and the peak end rule may contribute to better use of the spiritual moments in camps and activities. The study of logic is becoming increasingly important in order to spot and combat misinformation and fake news. And there is no need for an in-depth leader's knowledge in order to offer philosophical reflection moments in Scouting. In the same way, there is no need for a priesthood qualification in order to organize a Scout's Own.